Making an effort to understand highly sensitive children is a really important endeavor because, wow, are these kids misunderstood? And boy, are the consequences of them being misunderstood enormous. To start, I just want to discuss a little bit this concept here. So there's a concept of the highly sensitive person or highly sensitive child, which comes from the work of Elaine Aron. And for anybody who's not familiar with my channel, I'm always somewhat skeptical of constructs like this, as well as even DSM labels and often the way concepts like neurodivergence are applied. I've never really liked them in my own life, and I think proceeding very cautiously with them is warranted because A, there's no objective tests to determine if you are or aren't one. It's unclear whether the traits you're exhibiting are nature or nurture or even just fundamental attribution error. And whether someone does or doesn't count as one, often that line there can be quite arbitrary. So if that is a concept that resonates with you, I totally support that. But for me, leaning too much into that construct is not something that resonates with me. That being said, the idea that someone is highly sensitive or someone is very sensitive is definitely something that resonates with me. So as a kid, I was constantly called too sensitive. I often do feel things very deeply. I often pick up on the energy of other people, their vibe very easily. And I often do need to spend a lot of time just processing things. And I think in the broader culture, that sensitivity is related to artists. I think of people like Robin Williams. It's related to leaders like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Thoreau, and a whole variety of philosophical and spiritual leaders. And so I personally resonate more with conceptualizing sensitivity in this way rather than a kind of quasi-medical construct. Now, getting toward understanding highly sensitive children, I would say that overall, highly sensitive kids have a great need for emotional self-awareness in a world that very often is not very emotionally aware. In our culture, when we're not busy dismissing emotions, we're often busy pathologizing them and sort of encouraging ourselves to be scared of them. Understanding emotions, processing them, learning from them, that kind of a practice is not something that is highly valued in our culture. And yet, it is incredibly important for the highly sensitive child because if they don't do that work, and if they don't develop a really solid practice for that, in my opinion, then there can be a lot of problems, right? There could be a lot of suffering. They might develop what our culture calls mental health issues. And so having that kind of a really solid self-awareness practice, a really solid spiritual practice that allows us to go into our emotions and learn from them and process them is incredibly essential. And this, I think, is why you often see many highly sensitive people becoming these people that are very dedicated to their own spiritual path. And so there is a conflict that arises between the very real, very strong needs of the highly sensitive child and the world that is not really that aware a lot of the time, and that often is very arrogant because it sees these kids as basically having a deficit for being different than it. It attributes their suffering, which it doesn't understand, to some kind of deficit in them. And many people who are very well-meaning will then treat kids on this basis. That could be parents, it could be educators, it could be mental health professionals. And the really scary thing is that a lot of highly sensitive children are often pushed into the mental health system where they are then further not understood and they are basically shaped and warped on this false basis. They're totally misunderstood, and then the mental health professionals basically turn them into something that they're not. They'll try to convert them into some standard of normality in the head of the mental health professional, And what does this do to the highly sensitive child? Well, it traumatizes them and it prevents them from really developing themselves and allowing them to realize that fully in the world. And so they basically force these kids to disconnect from themselves, whether it's psychiatrists having them take medication that dulls their emotions, or it's therapists who impose their interpretations on these kids and consolidate power over them, or it's professional behaviorists that treat them like rats in an experiment. One of the things that I've come to realize as time goes on is that many people are very disconnected from themselves. They're disconnected from the truth of who they are deep inside of themselves, and they have become, to varying degrees, a kind of false self that was designed to protect them. And that's something that you start to pick up on more clearly the more you connect with your own self. And highly sensitive children tend to pick up on this intuitively. And a great challenge for highly sensitive children is that these people can often have a very prominent place in our lives. They could be our parents, they could be our siblings, our teachers, they could be mental health professionals that we're forced to see. And if these people have a lot of power over us, they have the power to then shape us into basically being reflections of them, into being repressed and disconnected from ourselves. And this basically means existential death for the highly sensitive child. And so as adults, navigating our way out of that after we have been broken down by our environment for our own good is quite challenging, but quite doable. And that, by the way, is a lot of what this channel is about. Also, such disconnected people often get very triggered around these kids. They get reactive, they might project things onto them like, oh, you're weird or whatever. But what's really going on is these people lack depth. The highly sensitive person is sort of picking up on what's going on at a certain greater level of depth within them because they're just kind of connected to that on an intuitive level. And then this triggers the person. And so the highly sensitive child can easily become a scapegoat, whether it's in a family system, in the school, particularly because as kids, we're not empowered. We are so dependent, and we can also become really reactive ourselves because we are in so much pain because we've been totally misunderstood. We haven't been properly attuned to by our environment. When we're adults, it's a lot easier to avoid being scapegoated because we can empower ourselves and we can, navigate our own energy properly, and we can navigate life in such a way that we don't get scapegoated. But as kids, we don't really have this option. And scapegoated individuals, again, often find themselves in the mental health system, which is really scary. I saw a quote on Twitter not too long ago. I unfortunately forget who it was from, but it was something to the effect of, a scapegoat in a family system will become a scapegoat in the mental health system. This is a very scary and very unfortunate truth. So these are just some of my thoughts on understanding highly sensitive children. Maybe you were somebody that went through this as a kid and now you're an adult trying to understand where you came from and how to heal and recover your full potential. Maybe you are a parent trying to understand your child and trying to do the best that you can for them. Maybe you are an educator who sees some of these dynamics going on and you want to bring some change to these dynamics. I think that having some real curiosity about ourselves and about what can be going on here is really powerful and can do a lot of good for everybody involved. So I really hope that you have enjoyed this video. Please consider sharing it with anybody else who you think might find it valuable. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you for watching this all the way to the end, and I look forward to having you for the next one.